It is a very one-sided and unfair one, but I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit.
Well, that's President Trump, of course, wrapping up his Asia trip now. 13 days, chock full of diplomacy and pageantry. You know, one of the highlights was his meeting in China with President Xi to try and put more pressure on North Korea and Kim Jong-un, rebalance trade. He signed $250 billion in new business deals and strengthened the ties between our two nations. And you know, we're used to scenes like this, but the China breakthrough started with President Richard Nixon. You know, he embarked on his historic visit back in 1972, a move that opened China to the West. So what are the results of President Trump's trip on his legacy? Christopher Cox knows the reaction firsthand. He is President Nixon's grandson. Chris is son of Edward Cox and Tricia Nixon Cox. He's a North Africa and Asian political expert and founder of the financial advisory firm OC Global Partners. Chris, welcome. Your grandfather was basically responsible for bringing China into the modern world. So how do you think he would judge the president's efforts?
I think he'd be very impressed by what's going on today with the president's trip, Eric. If you look at the progress that was made on trade, as you mentioned, the $250 billion of deals that were signed with U.S. companies and Chinese companies, that's a tremendous boost to the U.S. economy, and it's very favorable for our country. And then if you look geopolitically, which of course was my grandfather's major area of interest, I think President Trump has been brilliant. If you look at strengthening the trilateral security cooperation between South Korea and Japan and the U.S. as it pertains to North Korea, that is no easy task. Japan and South Korea have governments that have traditionally had different opinions as to how to handle North Korea. And for President Trump to balance that and to strengthen that relationship is a huge accomplishment that he should get a lot of credit for.
Yeah, I mean, he really has been having these meetings both here and there. I mean, something else that you see that reminded me of your grandfather, in a sense. Is there a new global realism, do you think?
Yeah.
We've got 3 aircraft carrier battle groups, for example, right now, showing American power.
Yes, absolutely. Focusing on this approach of coercive diplomacy, bringing together countries that may not share our ideological beliefs but have common interests with the United States is certainly the basis of realistic foreign policy. And I think that President Trump is focusing on that. And I think that it's really going to start to pay dividends. North Korea is a menace to the world, and President Trump is beautifully balanced, having to deal with security issues with Japan and South Korea, with China's interests in North Korea, and he's beautifully balanced that on this trip, and I couldn't be more impressed with it.
But at the same time, China hasn't gone far enough. I mean, the critics say, you know, they haven't cut off the oil. They've cut off the coal, but the North Korean businesses haven't been cut off yet. There's still North Korean companies in Beijing. They've been told to get out, but that hasn't happened yet. And the North Korean workers who kick back a lot of money to Pyongyang, you know, they're still working. I mean, what do you say to the critics who say that the president has not been able to, you know, pressure China enough to do more to stop Kim Jong-un?
You know, these critics need to realize that it took my grandfather 4 years from the beginning of his presidency, almost 4 years, to be able to pull off his successful trip to China. And you have to give President Trump time. And I think that he's been moving quickly and efficiently, and that he's doing the right approach with China. It's ultimately not within China's interest to have a nuclear North Korea. If North Korea were to ever use a nuclear weapon or even test an atmospheric nuclear weapon, a lot of that blowback of nuclear fallout would fall on China. A lot of the ramifications for a failed state in North Korea would affect China greatly in terms of refugees coming across the Chinese border. So I think it's within China's interest to want to solve this problem. And I think that President Trump is very smart to work through diplomatic efforts and also to show the strength of the United States military. As you said, positioning 3 aircraft carriers off the coast of North Korea to conduct exercises. That's very, very important. And all that will go towards pushing China to do more to solve the North Korean issue.
And finally, at the same time while that's going on, you know, you got the tweets, you've got all the other, you know, controversies. Does that, you know, overshadow, do you think, accomplishments? I mean, your grandfather had that, and he went off to to China with that great diplomatic breakthrough?
I think that when judging President Donald Trump's record, we need to look at the results and the facts. And the facts show that there's been improvement in how the United States and China are cooperating on North Korea. The sanctions that China has put in place are some of the strongest that we've ever seen in terms of dealing with North Korea. And that's the right approach to handling it. I think when you look at trade agreements that Donald Trump signed with China in terms of, well, he hasn't signed them, but the U.S. companies have signed under Donald Trump's presidency with China, that's indicative of a policy that's succeeding. And I think that when you look at those facts, Donald Trump's making great progress. And let the tweets say what they will. I think actions matter more than words, and the actions have been quite impressive.
Yeah, Chief of Staff John Kelly today telling reporters that he doesn't pay attention to the tweets, that's about strategy. Chris Cox, the grandson of President Richard M. Nixon, who opened up China so many years ago, and we are the beneficiaries, some of us are, of that. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see how the president's strategy works. Chris, thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Of course. All right, though, for more on this, let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. He's a Fox News contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. Ambassador, welcome. Do you think the president has achieved his goals on this trip?
Well, I think he's achieved some of them, particularly in the security area. There's some information we don't have on the key meeting with China. Very little's been said about it. That could be because the Chinese pushed back on the president asking for a much tougher line on North Korea. It's also possible that they made some progress, but they think it's premature to put it out in public. I don't think we know yet. I just underline, we don't have a lot of time to wait around to find out. North Korea very close now to being able to drop thermonuclear warheads on any target in the United States. So if China's going to help, if China's really going to exert the unique power it has to affect North Korea, needs to do it soon.
What type of progress, as you mentioned, do you think they actually may have achieved and are keeping under wraps?
Well, if there's some agreement on tightening of economic pressure on North Korea, and I don't mean by sanctions, I mean by China essentially pulling the plug on its support for the regime. Obviously, it takes time to prepare that. You don't want to give tactical warning. North Koreans obviously very worried already. It could be they've talked about other alternatives. My preferred outcome is to reunite the two Koreas. That wouldn't happen overnight. So there are a variety of possibilities. Again, I say one possibility is the Chinese said, we're doing all we can. Why don't you sit down and negotiate with them, with the North Koreans, which is a complete non-starter in my view. A
non-starter in your view. I mean, what if that was the deal and the result of the meeting?
Well, I think then the outcome is nearly certain that North Korea will get nuclear weapons, and not just North Korea, since they'll sell to anybody with hard currency, Iran, terrorist groups, other aspiring nuclear powers. That's why the resolution of the North Korea issue is so important, because the proliferation impact of North Korea visibly getting nuclear weapons around the world would be considerable.
And can China realistically, do you think, actually do something? Look, they haven't cut off the oil. They've cut off some of the coal. They haven't shut down all the banks, although they've had an edict for that. And they haven't shut down the North Korean companies completely in China. And they haven't kicked out all of the North Korean employees that kick back all that money to keep the regime going.
Yeah, let's be clear. China's played both sides of the street on the North Korea question with us for 25 years. They say they don't want the North to have nuclear weapons. They say they're going to crack down on them. They do to a certain extent. It's really kabuki theater until our attention gets diverted somewhere else, and then they go back to business as usual. For 25 years, that's been going on. There's no more time for that. There's no more time for it. It's not enough to have good intentions or to let us think they have good intentions. They need to take the kind of steps China is uniquely capable of doing. Cutting off North Korea's oil supply, and they supply 90% of it. Helping make sure that Russia or Iran don't step in to pick up the pieces. These are all things China could do, and we're still waiting for evidence that they are.
Well, the president met with Vladimir Putin, and before that meeting said that he would hope that the Russian president could help on the North Korean issue. What are the chances of that?
I think pretty close to zero. I think Putin thinks North Korea is our problem. I think he doesn't think North Korea poses any threat to Russia. I think Putin has his eye on keeping these nuclear programs going in both North Korea and Iran. And, you know, even though ultimately President Trump may make a decision to use military force to destroy North Korea's programs. I don't think that would bother Putin either. I think he thinks he's in a win-win situation. He'll look cooperative and wait and see what we do.
Do you think he's in a win-win?
Yeah, look, I think as long as North Korea is out there, he sees it as a problem for the United States, Japan, South Korea, other countries in Asia. He does not see it as a problem for Russia any more than he sees the Iran nuclear program as a problem for Russia. I think China's view is the same. I think Russia and China are very closely coordinated on this, and I think they believe that for 25 years they've pretty much had their way while we've stumbled around. And just to say it one more time, we're running out of time on North Korea.
Running out of time, and the clock has been ticking. Sadly, they say within a year or so, potentially they could have the capability for that intercontinental ballistic missile that could hit the U.S. That is the threat. Ambassador John Bolton, always good to see you. I know there'll be more from the Gaystone Institute this week, by the way, on all this. Thank you for spending part of your time with us on a Sunday.
I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies. I've worked with them very strongly.
Now, President Trump saying it as bluntly as he could. He is praising the intelligence community and walking back those controversial comments about Russian President Vladimir Putin. You know, the president telling reporters yesterday that he believes Putin really means it when he says that Russia did not meddle in last year's election, that Putin believes that. But U.S. intel agencies agree that Russia did interfere in a presidential election. And today, two top former intelligence chiefs, well, they fired back at the president.
It's very clear that the Russians interfered in the election, and it's still puzzling as to why Mr. Trump does not acknowledge that and embrace it, and also push back hard against Mr. Putin. The Russian threat to our democracy and our democratic foundations is real.
And oh, by the way, the Russians are in abject violation of the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. So the Russians do not harbor good intentions toward the United States, and there shouldn't be any illusions or any ambiguity about that. And our president fosters that ambiguity.
Well, did the president go far enough? Let's bring in Jim Walsh. He's an international security expert, senior research associate at MIT Security Studies Program, and he's in Boston tonight. Jim, do you think, I mean, he was pretty clear. He said, I side with the intelligence agencies.
Yes.
Should he have said more, or is that enough?
I think that's enough. I mean, I think the main thing here, Eric, is I wish he would just stop talking about it, because it's come up every once in a while. He sort of, you know, freelances and says something, and then he gets himself in trouble. It's an argument he can't win. He can't say he believes an ex-KGB official more than he believes his own intel agency. So he should, I think this is a sign of learning. I welcome it. And so I think it's enough. But, you know, I have some feelings about the criticism, too. I'm not entirely comfortable with that.
Well, you talk about the criticism. John Brennan says, quote, he's being played, saying that about the president of the United States. A Clapper saying he's given Putin a pass. And then you've got the president, you know, tweeting back saying they're just a bunch of political hacks.
Right. And this sort of encapsulates my concern, Eric. And this is a little complex, but it's important enough that it's worth hanging in there. You know, if I say stuff, people can say, Jim Walsh, he's crazy, or Jim Walsh, he's reasonable, or whatever. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day, because I don't represent the U.S. government. But in our republic, since its founding, there's been a sensitivity about the line between civilian and national security and how that mixes. And there's good reason for that. There are lots of bad stories in other countries about militaries or intelligence agencies having undue influence on a government. And so Americans have worked very hard to keep that space appropriate. And so the intelligence community, for example, they do operations, they do analysis, but they don't do policy recommendations. That's a big red line for them. And so I think these guys, they're Americans, they're entitled to voice their opinion. But like a lot of thoughtful generals over the years, I've encouraged them to think about how far they're pushing this, because what can happen is a politicization of the national security establishment, of the intelligence community, and that could really hurt us down the line as a democracy. So I agree with much of their criticism today, but I really think they need to think carefully about what their role is and about the legacy, and for them to be as cautious outside of government as they were in government.
Well, you know about the criticisms of the so-called deep state and what has been said to the politicization of intelligence assessments and this sort of thing. So you're basically saying to both sides, cool it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the deep state thing is way overrepresented, but that's what, but that articulates, that fear articulates what's in play and why you want to be prudent when it comes to the balance of civilians and their job and the national security community and their job. And so I can say crazy stuff on TV, and that's perfectly fine, because people aren't going to associate that with the fact that, you know, which I haven't ever worked for an intelligence agency. I think that's a really precious commodity that everyone ought to try to preserve and not see this get politicized.
Yeah, and finally, I mean, does the president have a point when he sits there with, and he said, you know, how many times are they going to argue with him? I mean, how, you know, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. What do you do? Does the president look at broader global security issues like Syria, the starvation by Assad of his own people, like Iran, North Korea, and the threats that we face?
Yes, the short answer, Eric, is yes, you're absolutely right. Stop asking him. And even if he answers the question that you don't ask, whatever, move on. There's nothing in that conversation that's going to resolve this issue, right? The investigations will do that, or the other things. Just focus on, we've got so much big stuff. You mentioned several important ones this week in Saudi Arabia and with Lebanon. Oh my gosh, you saw that coming. So yeah, there's plenty here to deal with without talking about stuff that isn't going to advance the ball at all.
All right, Jim, thanks so much. Sage advice for some stability. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
President Trump's long trip to Asia now in the home stretch, with a final stop in the Philippines for a controversial meeting with that country's president. I'm Rick Leventhal. This is the Fox Report. President Trump in Manila now for formal talks with Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, a leader who has drawn international condemnation for sanctioning a bloody drug war in his country. Trump sharing a handshake with Duterte earlier, and they'll hold bilateral meetings at the ASEAN Summit, an annual gathering of leaders from East and Southeast Asian countries, in the next hour. Meanwhile, the rhetoric between the U.S. and North Korea took an unexpected turn last night, with President Trump jabbing at Pyongyang's leader, Kim Jong-un, on Twitter. The president tweeting, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat? Oh, well, I try so hard to be his friend, and maybe someday that'll happen." Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins me from Manila in the Philippines with more. John, there had to be some eye-rolling and some pretty dramatic reactions to that tweet in the Far East.
You know, there are always reactions to almost everything that the president tweets. And good morning to you, Rick, from Manila, where it's 8 o'clock in the morning. The president begins his day at the opening of the ASEAN conference. In about an hour's time, North Korea will be top of the agenda when the president talks with the leaders of 10 Southeast Asian nations, as well as meets with the prime ministers of Australia and India. It will also be, as you mentioned, his first sit-down bilateral meeting with the controversial president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. Duterte's administration has presided over the extrajudicial killings of thousands of drug dealers and drug abusers, and Duterte making no apology for it. In fact, not long ago, Duterte said that there are 3 million drug addicts in the Philippines, and he would be happy to, quote, slaughter them. He also has claimed as recently as Friday to have killed people himself, and you'll remember a year ago, he infamously called President Obama a, quote, son of a whore for daring to question his record on human rights. And he took another aim at President Obama on the sidelines of last week's APEC conference in Da Nang, Vietnam, calling him, quote, black and arrogant. None of that expected to come up in the president's bilateral meeting with Duterte, because the president really wants to focus on North Korea, also wants to focus on trade. And of course, the problem with China building military installations on the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, which literally is just a few miles away from where we are standing now. Peter Cayetano, who is the Foreign Affairs Secretary for the Philippines, talked to Fox News yesterday. He believes that the Philippines will have a much better relationship with the United States under the Trump administration than they did under the Obama administration. Listen here.
It's a relationship. Relationships are complicated. But you cannot view the relationship in one blow. For example, our military-to-military ties, very strong. Cooperation, very strong. So if there was a misunderstanding with the previous administration, there were words that were misinterpreted because of the distance, because of the different culture, I think it's been repaired now.
So President Trump has got a difficult needle to thread here. I mean, he needs Duterte's support for those big issues like North Korea and the South China Sea and trade. But, you know, these extrajudicial killings and human rights abuses, Rick, they are another big issue as well. So we'll see how the president handles that when we get the readout from that meeting later on today.
And John, last night at this time, we were talking about some of the controversy surrounding the president's remarks aboard Air Force One, and you got some clarification over the president's discussions with Vladimir Putin, right?
Yeah, you'll remember that controversy erupted yesterday, Rick, a little earlier than this time when the president said aboard Air Force One that Vladimir Putin had again assured him that he didn't meddle in the U.S. election. The president, when asked if he believed him, said, "I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it." That was taken back home initially, that the president believed Vladimir Putin. But we sought some clarification from him last night at a press conference that he had with President Quang of Vietnam in Hanoi at the presidential palace. I put the question to the president, can you clear this up once and for all? Do you believe or not believe President Putin when he says that neither he nor Russia meddled in the U.S. election? Let's listen to what the president said.
What I said there is that I believe he believes that, and that's very important for somebody to believe. I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership.
But aboard Air Force One, the president also disparaged the former leaders of the intelligence community, James Comey, James Clapper, and James Brennan, which brought a very sharp reaction from Brennan earlier this morning. Listen to this.
Well, I think Mr. Putin is very clever in terms of playing to Mr. Trump's interest in being flattered. And also, I think Mr. Trump is, for whatever reason, either intimidated by Mr. Putin, afraid of what he could do or what might come out as a result of these investigations. So it's very worrisome, and I think it sends a worrisome, very disturbing signal to our allies and partners who are concerned about Russian interference in their democratic processes as well.
And Rick, the president actually called me yesterday morning to talk a little bit more about his meetings with President Putin. And he told me that they met on the sidelines of the APEC conference, at cross-meeting tables, things like that, only very briefly. And he didn't want to spend that entire time arguing about whether or not Russia meddled in the election, because there were other important issues like what to do about Syria, what to do about North Korea that he needed to talk about. So he basically said that he listened to what Putin said and then moved on to other issues.
You know,
Rick?
John, I was just going to ask you if the White House and I guess President Trump himself is disappointed that so much attention is being focused on these words about Putin when he's covered so much ground during this trip to Asia.
Well, part of the problem, though, is, Rick, is that, you know, the wound was a little bit self-inflicted. You know, that the president, I don't know if he just feels like if he says that he doesn't believe Putin, it's calling Putin a liar, and then that's going to ruin the relationship that he's trying to build with Russia, you know, cooperation on Syria, North Korea, and other issues. Well, but the president could easily put this away if he just said, look, I believe what our intelligence officials said. I believe what they've said, you know, for months and maybe even a couple of years now about all of this. And Putin can say what he wants. That's fine. I'm going to side with the intelligence community. Now let's move on to other things. But he always seems to hedge. So in some ways, this is a little bit of a self-inflicted wound.
We're going to have much more on that later this hour. John Roberts, thanks so much.
The elites are out for blood. They scent a chance to crush populism, and they're going all out to do it. We've got to be smart to beat back this establishment counter-revolution. It started after Tuesday's election results, with the elite saying, look at the scale of the Republican losses among women, young people, minorities, college graduates. Populism has peaked, they said. It's just old white men. But hang on a second. Populism is different to and bigger than the GOP. It's about standing up for the victims of elitism, and here they are. Let's bring up our income chart. Under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, half the country saw their incomes go down. Elitism hurt men and women, old people and young people, those of all backgrounds in every part of the country. Positive populism means a pro-worker, pro-family, pro-democracy agenda to help everyone left behind. So don't let the elites tell you that it's just a narrow and negative movement. But the establishment fight back really took a dark turn with the allegations against Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore in the Washington Post on Thursday. It's obvious to everyone that this is a political hit job, plain and simple. The idea that this shows up a month before an election, after the Republican primary and after the Washington Post endorsed the Democrat in the race, the idea that this is a coincidence, some kind of fluke of journalistic timing, is laughable. In fact, if you read the original piece, the reporters basically admit they were down in Alabama looking for dirt on Roy Moore. But, as I said at the beginning, if we're going to defeat the elite fight back, we've got to be smart. Many Republicans are going around saying, if these allegations are proved to be true, then Moore is a disgusting child molester who has no place in the Senate. Yeah, child molesters are the lowest of the low and have no place anywhere in our communities, never mind the United States Senate.
Like that song. Gets you going when you hear it on the radio. Good morning. You're watching Fox and Friends First on this Monday morning. I'm Jillian Mealy.
Happy Monday. I'm Rob Schmidt. Thanks for starting your day with us. It is 5 a.m. here on the East Coast. Right to our top story. Breaking overnight, President Trump just meeting with Indian Prime Minister Modi.
It's the latest in his day of meetings at the ASEAN summit, which included a controversial sit-down with Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte.
Kevin Cork is traveling with the president. He joins us live from Manila in the Philippines this morning. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, guys. Always good to talk to you. You're right. As the president winds down this 13-day, 5-country nation tour of the beautiful continent of Asia, he is making it clear that he believes that his is an era of renewal and respect in the region.
This has been a very fruitful trip for us, and also, in all fairness, for a lot of other nations. There's red carpet like nobody, I think, has probably ever received, and that really is a sign of respect.
A sign of respect, says Mr. Trump. That comment reflecting the warm welcome he's received here at ASEAN. Of course, that is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where trade and economic cooperation generally headline the gathering. But this year, as you point out there, Rob, it's the mini breakouts, most notably the ones with Presidents Trump and Duterte that are garnering a great deal of attention. The men, as you can imagine, seem fairly comfortable together. They discussed a variety of issues, including security and the fight against ISIS, where they touched on human rights just a bit. The president said it was part of just what he calls an incredibly pivotal visit to the region.
We'll be making a statement when we get back from the White House. We've made some very big steps with respect to trade, far bigger than anything you know. In addition to about $300 billion in sales to various companies, including China.
Lastly, the family photo this year, folks, well, it's one that'll have tongues a-wagging. Now, usually the leaders, sort of stand there and they cross their arms and they hold hands, a sign of unity on an international stage. But guys, look, it only works if you stand really close together. The leaders having a little fun with the fact that didn't quite go as well as planned. Now, you mentioned the Modi bilateral tonight. It's a dinner with the Prime Minister of Australia. We'll keep you posted on all the details, and we promise we'll be nice and close together. Back to you guys.
Kevin, thank you so much. All right, the White House firing back against claims that the president is being played by Vladimir Putin. This is former CIA Director John Brennan expressed his worries about President Trump's recent conversations with Russia's president.
I think Mr. Putin is very clever in terms of playing to Mr. Trump's interest in being flattered. I think Mr. Trump is, for whatever reason, either intimidated by Mr. Putin, afraid of what he could do.
Minutes later, White House Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin hitting back at those comments.
Well, in all due respect to your previous guests, I think that those were the most ridiculous statements. President Trump is not getting played by anybody.
All right, Mr. Trump tweeting over the weekend, when will all the haters and fools out there realize that having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing? They're always playing politics, bad for our country. I want to solve North Korea, Syria, Ukraine, terrorism, and Russia can greatly help.
Now to another Fox News alert. At least 330 people are dead after a monster earthquake rocks the Iran-Iraq border. Those numbers rising by the minute this morning after the 7.3 magnitude quake hit just north of Baghdad. Nearly 4,000 people in both countries are hurt, many running for their lives as buildings swayed. Video from a Kurdish TV news station shows a guest shaking in his seat during an interview before rushing off the set. Look at that. The quake was felt as far out as the western Mediterranean coast. About 50 aftershocks rattling the region in the hours following the quake. We'll keep you posted. A stabbing spree at the nation's largest shopping mall just feet from where kids were visiting with Santa. Police say a botched robbery at a Macy's dressing room inside Mall of America turned into a stabbing spree when the suspect was confronted by other shoppers. 2 people were stabbed but will be okay. Customers holding the man down until police arrested him. This all unfolding next door from where dozens of children were getting photos taken with Santa Claus.
All right, the final witness in the Kate Steinle murder trial expected to take the stand today. Illegal immigrant Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez, who was already deported 5 times, admits to shooting Kate Steinle, but claims that the gun went off accidentally. The 32-year-old was killed in 2015 while walking on a pier in San Francisco with her father. Her death inspired Kate's Law, which cracks down on illegal immigrant criminals, but that law is still working its way through Congress. Closing arguments in the trial are expected next week. Just 1 week after a gunman opened fire, killing 26 people during a worship service in Texas, that same congregation meeting for church once again.
We have the freedom to choose, and rather than choose darkness, as the one young man did that day, I say we choose life. And by choosing life, amen.
It was a much larger service than normal. Hundreds of people showing up at this tent service for First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. The church building turned into a memorial you see here and opened to the public. It is beautiful. Each victim represented by an empty white chair and a single rose. The building is expected to eventually be demolished.
Wow. A mother hailed a hero for saving her children from a burning apartment building. Texas firefighters saying a child playing with a lighter started the fire on the complex's 2nd floor. 50 families now without a home. 4 people being treated for minor injuries.
All right, just hours from now, the NFL will negotiate the alleged $50 million contract extension of Commissioner Roger Goodell.
But at least one owner says not so fast after Goodell's handling of the national anthem protests. Caroline Shively joins us now from Washington, D.C. with the latest. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. If the NFL approves it, this would be one heck of a raise for Roger Goodell. The contract would reportedly raise his salary from $30 million to $49.5 million a year. And that's not all. It would also provide him private jet use for life and lifetime health insurance for his family. That's according to ESPN. All 32 NFL owners voted in May to extend Goodell's contract and authorize the compensation committee to negotiate on their behalf. But it's not a done deal. In fact, Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones is threatening to sue the NFL if they okay Goodell's contract without further approval from owners.
All right, President Trump coming face-to-face with Vladimir Putin in Asia as the mainstream media continues to really push the Russia collusion theory.
I think he's giving Putin a pass, and I think it demonstrates to Mr. Putin that Donald Trump can be played.
He believes them. While he does not believe the intelligence agencies of the United States of America.
Donald Trump's policy seems to be trust. Hey, listen, Putin said that they didn't do it, so they didn't do it.
All right, so were the president's remarks taken out of context? Here to debate that is contributor for The Hill and the Washington Examiner, Jen Kearns, along with president of Solidarity Strategies and former Bernie Sanders surrogate Chuck Rocha. Guys, thanks so much for coming on this morning. Jen, I want to start with you now. You heard the initial comment from the president. You really believe that this was taken out of context, that he didn't say that he doesn't think Russia meddled. He says that he believes that Vladimir Putin doesn't think that they meddled. Explain to me what that means. Clarify that for us.
Well, you know, it's interesting to watch the mainstream media as well as the left attack the president when he's traveling on foreign soil. We used to have this gentleman's agreement in America where you didn't critique the president, whether he was a Republican or a Democrat, while they were on foreign soil. So situations like this are really mind-blowing, that you have a comment by the leader of the free world that can be taken out of context and sent halfway around the world. In this case, the president felt the need to come back back and clarify his remarks. Look, I don't think he's taking it easy on Vladimir Putin. I think he's doing what he needs to do, which is work with these world leaders and continue to move forward on foreign policy.
And Jen, let me read that, and then Chuck, I'm going to get your reaction. This is the actual quote of what the president said, which he says was taken out of context. Here it is. He just, every time he sees me, he says, I didn't do that. And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. So that's it right there. Chuck, what do you say to this? Give me your response.
Well, I think our national security advisors have told us exactly what's went on, and that Russia meddled in our elections. Now, Donald Trump comes out and says stuff all the time. That's how Donald Trump got elected. Then he has to come back and walk it back because he's like, I can't really say it that way. Now, what you're going to see in the media, just like, let me give you a word called Benghazi. We talked about that a little bit on this network. When networks find something that they can use, that we're out there talking about, it helps them get ratings, and that's why the other press is out there doing it. Yeah. And I think the elections last Tuesday show that the American people want the answers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's fair. I mean, the networks are going to cover it if it sells, and Russia sells to the left, to the people that don't like the president. It is a good sale. What do you say to that, Jen?
Well, look, I think it's ironic to see John Brennan talking about harming the intelligence community. Let's remember it was James Brennan who infused the Fusion GPS document, the Trump dossier, into the intelligence community during an election year. This turned out to be a paid political hit piece funded by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. So John Brennan ought to be very careful when talking about who has harmed the intelligence community. I can think of nothing worse than putting in a disinformation piece of information that may have been funded by Russia in part into the system. I mean, this is really, really maddening, really crazy stuff.
Chuck, just to the general, the status of this investigation, you know, there has been some ties to it, but we're not really getting a huge smoking gun at this point. Do you think it's still coming, or do you think that when you investigate an entire administration, there's always going to be some kind of ties to anywhere, right? I mean, there's ties from the Clintons to Russia.
Let me give you the Democratic view from the far left, which is where I reside. I don't care who did what. Let's get to the bottom of it. Whether it was Hillary Clinton, whether it was Donald Trump, whether it was the Russians, whether it was whoever it was, let's get the facts and let's get it over with. The American people are sick of this. They want to know if they was guilty or not guilty, and let's move on because we got a lot of work to do behind me here in Washington, D.C., try to get this country moving.
Chuck, you are very level-headed as always. We do appreciate it. Jen, you as well. Wonderful conversation this morning on a very interesting topic, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Jillian.
Former Vice President Joe Biden shying away from a 2020 presidential run. In an interview set to be released on Snapchat's Good Luck America tomorrow, Biden says, quote, I've done it a long time and I'm just not sure it's the appropriate thing for me to do. However, according to the preview obtained by the Associated Press, Biden goes on to suggest that if no one steps up, he'd be open to giving it a try. We'll see. One of those Democrats who could step up is Clinton crony and outgoing Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. Speculation of a 2020 run growing after Democrats in the state had a successful election last Tuesday. McAuliffe not ruling it out.
Will we see McAuliffe in 2020 on the list of possible Democratic candidates for president? Yes or no?
Reverend, I'm going to finish this job strong, and let's talk after I get out of here.
McAuliffe used his executive power last year to restore voting rights to more than 200,000 convicted felons ahead of the 2016 election.
All right, 19 minutes after the hour, Senator John Cornyn firing back at Chuck Schumer for calling President Trump's Asia trip a flop. And social media fired up over this. Carly Shipkiss here next with some outrage online.
Uh-oh.
Good morning.
To get that training,
right.
We need actual aircraft in the air flying against us. With this system, we don't. What we could do now is let you have a chance to fly the airplane. Pull some G's.
And American companies answering the call to help our military grow stronger, faster. Rob's climbing into the cockpit ahead. Oh, boy. Senator John Cornyn coming to President Trump's defense, firing back at Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who called his trip to Asia a flop.
Carly Shimkus is here. Chuck Schumer talking trash about the president?
That's right.
Well, I never.
Oh, my gosh. Is the world going to stop? Well, the president is in the Philippines right now on his last leg of his trip to Asia, and he's had some good news to report on Twitter, saying China is upping sanctions against North Korea. But New York Senator Chuck Schumer is calling the trip a failure. He took to Twitter saying this: Trump Asia trip a flop. POTUS acts like a lapdog to Xi in China, but talks tough to our friends in Southeast Asia. Presidency by misadventure. Well, Texas Senator John Cornyn had this to say in response. So much for Senator Arthur Vandenberg's admonition that we must stop partisan politics at the water's edge. Now, what he's saying there is that it's never a good idea to criticize an acting president while on a diplomatic mission overseas. A lot of people are weighing in on this back and forth on Twitter. Rick says, and he's referring to Senator Schumer here, he says, I think you're so wrong. His reestablishment of alliances and firm stance for the U.S. is noteworthy. Going back to what John Cornyn said, though, it is true, very important to present a united front, especially when dealing with other countries, right?
Yeah, well, it used to be.
Carly, do you think that Santa Claus is a little fed up with Amazon right now?
Yeah, that's the big question of the day. So parents are very angry with Amazon after they released an ad in the UK that shows a father hiding presents instead of Santa Claus. Take a look at this.
At Amazon, we've got toys and games by the sackload this Christmas, with free delivery on millions of eligible items.
Well, everybody knows that's Santa's job, so Amazon is just clearly wrong. Sophie on Twitter says, thanks, Amazon, for your advertisement. My 3-year-old is asking why this man is hiding the presents instead of Santa Claus.
And I'm sure Santa's very angry, too.
Yes, I know. So I hear he's very forgiving. So if Jeff Bezos asks nicely, he might still remain on the list.
Yeah,
right?
that's not a very good move. And what happened to Carrie Underwood?
All right, well, you know, she brought the house down during the Country Music Awards, but she appears to have had some trouble when she got back home. What if I won't let you fall? Well, listen, she fell and she broke her wrist. She was rushed to the hospital, but she says that she is okay. In this tweet to fans, she says, thank you so much for all the well wishes, everybody. I'll be all right. Might just take some time. Glad I've got the best hubby in the world to take care of me. Got a great husband, got a whole lot of fans that are concerned about her, too.
I fall.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Mike Fisher, who is a former hockey player. I think he just retired.
Preds.
Yeah.
Okay, not another country star?
Not another country star, yeah.
Okay.
But still.
Carly?
Nashville favorite.
There you go.
Thanks a lot.
All right. 26 minutes after the hour, lawmakers on Capitol Hill preparing to battle it out over tax reform. Can Congress actually get something done this year and put some money back in your pocket? We're live with the next...
Welcome back and good morning. While President Trump finishes his Asia tour, Congress is full steam ahead on passing tax reform to put more money in your pocket.
They're going to try, but the question everyone's asking, can they get this done by the end of the year? Griff Jenkins in D.C. this morning with what's happening today to push it forward. Hey, Griff.
Hey, Robin, Julian. Well, they're making progress, but a ways to go. The full House votes this week as the Senate begins markup today. And remember, a plan must pass both chambers before they can reconcile a final bill. And already both plans are meeting criticism that they actually raise taxes. But House Ways and Means Chairman Kevin Brady downplayed the criticism, saying they're on track to get something to the president's desk.
We continue to make improvements at every step in the way, but I'll tell you what, our Republicans in the House know that it is time to deliver on this economy and grow these paychecks by getting rid of this current tax code. That's exactly what we're going to do.
Let's look at those plans. In the Senate plan, there are 7 brackets, 4 in the House. The Senate lets homeowners deduct mortgage interest payments up to $1 million. The House cuts that in half. Both slash the corporate rate to 20%, but the Senate delays it a year. And the most glaring difference, the Senate plan completely eliminates the federal deduction for state and local taxes, while the House allows up to $10,000 for property taxes. And this last one has Republicans in high tax states like New York, New Jersey, and California very worried, and Democrats like Chuck Schumer blasting it.
If state and local is in this bill, it's a dagger to the heart of New York. It's a dagger to the heart of New Jersey. And those 15, have to choose their states over the rich special interests who are trying to push them around so they can get a tax break.
And as they work all this out, the president will come home and surely put a lot of pressure on lawmakers to get things moving even farther forward, Rob.
All right, Griff, thanks so much. All right, it is a scandal that you may not hear much about from the mainstream media. After 3 decades as one of the top D.C. lobbying firms, the Podesta Group could be shutting down by the end of the year. The firm, which is being eyed by Robert Mueller's ever-expanding Russia investigation, is now being pressured to close. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton joined us earlier with his thoughts on what we see as a media blackout of this story.
The standard for Mueller seems to be, if you did business with the Russians and you're a Republican, you're going to be in our sights. With someone like John Podesta, there's no evidence that similar issues with Democrats are subject of investigation.
Co-founder of the group, John Podesta, chaired Hillary Clinton's failed 2016 presidential campaign. So this is all a little incestuous, and they're looking into it. A historic show of force against North Korean aggression. The U.S. Navy carrying out a rare 3-carrier exercise in the Sea of Japan. The USS Nimitz, Ronald Reagan, and Theodore Roosevelt doing multiple drills along with South Korean and Japanese warships. This is the first time the 3 U.S. carriers have exercised together in about 10 years. The drills are anticipated to end on Tuesday. An air traffic controller in big trouble for possessing a weapon of mass destruction. Paul George Dandon, who worked the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, had a pipe bomb at his house. He claims he got it from his roommate, Derek Fells, who was also arrested. Fells was apparently planning to use it on a neighbor after some type of dispute. The FAA has terminated Dandon's access to the airport. He is set to face a judge today on federal charges. Major stadiums across New York City are amping up their security as terror concerns are on the rise. More than a dozen NYPD officers armed with high-powered semi-automatic commando rifles will be stationed at Madison Square Garden and Brooklyn's Barclays Center within the next few weeks. The officers undergoing a special 2-week anti-terror training course. This comes less than 2 weeks after an ISIS-inspired terrorist rammed a truck into pedestrians along the West Side Highway in Manhattan, killing 8 people. Jillian.
Anthem outrage boiling over. At least 3 players taking a knee as the league honors America's real heroes during Veterans Day weekend. This as the league announces that there will be no change to the anthem policy as more fans boycott. Here now to react is Army Reserves veteran Kathy Barnett. Thank you so much for joining us, Kathy. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Were you surprised when you saw a handful of players taking a knee on Veterans Day weekend?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. And nor am I surprised by the decision from the NFL commissioners. I've often said that the change we want to see in America is not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the grassroots up. And we saw what the power of the grassroots in the last November when we elected Donald Trump. That was not supposed to happen. But the grassroots is a formidable group of people. And when we get sick and tired of being sick and tired, change happens.
So, in fairness, some people on the other side, I guess, would argue that and counter that by saying, but isn't that what the Colin Kaepernicks of the world are trying to do? How would you respond to that?
Well, then I will respond to that with, let's look at the facts. The fact, if the narrative is that on every street corner there's a police officer waiting to shoot a black man, because remember, hands up, don't shoot was very popular at one point. If that's the narrative, then we have to look at the facts. And in 2016, 233 blacks were fatally shot by the police. Of that, 16 were unarmed. Now, the 16, it kind of masks the fact that some of those particular fatal shootings were due to very aggressive resistance of arrest. But nonetheless, one is too many. But if the narrative is, and the reason why they're kneeling, that we're suffering from on every street corner, there's a police officer ready to shoot a black man, well, it just doesn't jive with the facts.
Right. You look at the fact that this weekend it was the fewest number of players who were kneeling in quite some time, probably all season long. Mm-hmm. Do you see this starting to dwindle down a little bit? Is that your hope at this point anyway? Where do we see this ending?
Well, we can always keep hope alive, but the reality is, I call it little crumbs of acquiescing, right? So we see the very sappy little commercials with the NFL players and the violin music softly playing in the background, and on one
side of their mouth, they're saying that they really respect the veterans, but on the other side of their mouth, they're showing disrespect towards the very symbol of honor. You know, I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting Johnny Joseph Jones, Triple J.
Johnny Joe Jones.
Yeah, I know. We love him, right? And to hear his story, he lost both of his legs in Afghanistan. And I remember, you know, so many of our soldiers, they followed that flag into battle. And now we have people who dare to take a knee, it's become really political.
Before we let you go, we have about 20 seconds.
Yes.
What's your thought on the fact that Roger Goodell is reportedly requesting $50 million as a salary, a private jet for his life?
I know,
Does he deserve
right?
that?
I mean, come on, a $20 million raise. He's already making $30 million, right? But just look at the hypocrisy, because this is a man who says he does not want to impede on the NFL players' right to speak, and he's going to have these meetings, talk about inequality. Talk about inequality, and you're requesting a $20 million raise and a private jet and lifetime benefits. And what have you done for the league? Everything is falling, whether it's attendance, viewership, even sponsors. So why do you want the $20 million? Talk about inequalities.
Kathy Barnett, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Rob? Sorry, Rob. We're going to go to Janice Dean first. We'll get to you, Rob, in a second. Janice, with a look at the weather.
I would love to see Rob do the weather, actually. Can we get that happening? That's my wish for Santa. Let's take a look at the current temperature, shall we? 44 in New York, not too bad. I mean, it got cold over the weekend across the Northeast, so we're starting to moderate a little bit. 34 in Chicago, 26 in Minneapolis, cooler across the northern tier, warm across still the Gulf Coast. Let's take a look. We do have a weak system pushing across the Northeast. Behind the system, we're seeing a little bit of snow across the Northeast, so let's zoom on in and I'll show you where we're seeing the coastal rain event. New York, you're not going to see the snow, but you can see some snow flying certainly west of the New York City area. And then our next big system is pushing into the west, bringing rain and mountain snow and very gusty winds. The area of low pressure moving into British Columbia, but the associated front is going to bring excessive amounts of rain and some mountain snow to the northern Rockies as well as the interior Northwest. All right, Jillian and Rob, back to you. What do you think, Rob? You going to do some weather with me?
You know what? If nobody's going to watch me do the weather.
Yes, they will.
They want to see Janice Dean do the weather.
No.
Here's my
I'll watch you
forecast.
do
It's going to be colder for the next 4 months. Generally speaking.
You're very smart, Rob.
Janice, thanks so much.
All right.
39 minutes after the hour, illegal immigrants now using churches as sanctuaries to avoid arrest. But is that really what a house of God ought to be doing?
God has given government, not the church, the responsibility to enforce the law, and that's an important distinction to keep in mind.
All right, so there's a Bible lesson that these churches may want to hear. That's coming up next.
We're trying to develop the next generation of pilot training for the U.S. Air Force. One of the keys to that is virtual reality.
And American companies answering the call to help our military grow stronger and faster. Yeah, that's Rob Schmidt climbing into the cockpit, still ahead.
Put your pretty big toes on the dash, lean the seat back. Man, I swear there ain't nothing looks better.
For months, the U.S. Air Force has been saying they are facing a pilot shortage, and it appears to be getting worse. One way to help training new pilots faster and more effectively. Rob, come in and tell us about this. Come on.
We're just going to change things up here. 3 major companies now competing for an Air Force contract to replace their aging training jets. That's how they get people ready for the real thing.
Okay.
These companies are Boeing, Leonardo SPA, which is an Italian company, and also Lockheed Martin. So I went to the Lockheed Martin operation in Greenville, South Carolina to see exactly what they have to offer. Take a look.
I feel the need for speed.
Do I look like Maverick?
Or Goose?
I may look like I'm ready to fly, but it takes a lot to make it as a fighter pilot in the U.S. military. And Lockheed Martin is aiming to make the process a little easier. They're one of 3 major companies looking to win a contract with the U.S. Air Force to build a new training jet. But it's not just a plane Lockheed is offering the Air Force, it's an entire training system.
We're trying to develop the next generation of pilot training for the U.S. Air Force.
This is where the students would begin the process.
Exactly.
This is where they start trying to get into that jet.
Exactly. One of the keys to that is virtual reality. The student can see inside the cockpit, can manipulate controls of the cockpit, all within a classroom.
The whole idea here is teaching student pilots in a faster way, in a better way, and in a cheaper way by using programs like this. But this is just a simulation. Now it's time to really get in the jet. Helping me out is Lockheed Martin experimental test pilot Elliot Hemo Clemens. He's a former F-18 Navy pilot who also has hundreds of hours flying the new F-35.
This is a T-50. It's a well-vetted, high-performing jet trainer. As technology matures, we take advantage of that, and it's going to train Air Force pilots a lot more efficiently than has been done in the past. And we have a good solution with that. It's ready now. It's low risk. The aircraft's been produced. It's been tested. It's been vetted. It's been flown. So we did have this airplane modified a little bit.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
Recognize that name? Are you ready to go flying?
I'm absolutely 100% ready to go flying.
Let's get out there then.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so now we're just going to pull some G's.
Okay.
Okay, that's 4 G's.
That was intense.
Okay, now Rob, if you look at your display, you can see the red triangles. Those are, I just started up the scenario.
Okay, sure.
So those are the computer-generated bad guys.
Okay, yep.
It's all fake. And once they get in range, I'll shoot simulated missiles at them.
What would you guys have done before you could do this kind of simulation? Would you have had to just play like games with each other, or how does it work?
To get that training,
right,
we need actual aircraft in the air flying against us. With this system, we don't. What we could do now is let you have a chance to fly the airplane.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay. You can take the stick and you can roll it as much as you want.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Here we go. I'm rolling it. 135.
Woo! Well, you know, the rule is if you roll left, you have to unwind by rolling right. Is
that right?
Yeah.
Okay, rolling right. Here we go.
Rolling right. Here we go.
Woo! Oh my God.
Actually doing pretty good. I've never flying before.
I mean, that is just the craziest thing.
How cool is that?
Everybody asks me, like, you must have a pilot's license, right? I'm like, no, I don't know anything about planes. Yeah, I was clueless.
So,
this is how they train people.
Yeah. So you asked a couple questions if you look like Maverick or Goose. Who do you think you look like?
Probably neither.
Neither? Well, we have a shot here for you. What do you think?
Well, that's okay. I like that. Yeah, very much.
You like it?
I'd like to think I look like the guy on the left, but,
well,
you know.
Tell us at home what you think. You can tweet Rob. What's your Twitter handle?
God, I don't know. What is my Twitter handle?
Search his name on Twitter.
Rob Schmidt. Look forward. You'll find it out there somewhere. This was so cool, though. I mean, this is a program. It's billions of dollars. Yeah. I mean, to put all this together. So I mean, it's just amazing. And they want to build these jets for the government and get our pilots ready faster and in a better way, so that they can be out there defending our country. And a very important topic right now.
That was very hard to do.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Wow.
All right, online terror, thank you. Yeah, online terror propaganda at an all-time high. And finally, one of the internet's biggest players is doing something about it. The big change that's coming to YouTube coming up.
First, let's check in with Brian Kilmeade to see what's coming up on Fox and Friends. Hey, Brian.
I just know that everything I do is going to be less cool than Rob did over the weekend. But I'll tell you, we have a lot on tap for the next 3 hours. Ivanka Trump will be with us. She's going to be talking about tax reform and how it relates to the female out there, especially when it comes to the child tax credit. When you talk about Governor Mike Huckabee, you talk about a guy that not only knows the press secretary, but also knows the president quite well. He'll bring us the inside story on the president's trip and the controversy around some of his comments with Vladimir Putin. But so far, he's in the Philippines. We'll bring you the absolute latest as it unfolds. Congressman Louis Gohmert will be with us, talks about tax reform. And when you talk about the war on terror, you talk about General Jack Keane. General Jack with his connections inside the White House and more. Don't miss a minute of Fox and Friends. I urge you, please get dressed.
First, they're offered sanctuary. Now, illegal immigrants are getting free legal help in nearly a dozen U.S. cities. The Vera Institute of Justice launching their Safe and Fairness for Everyone campaign by paying legal bills for detained illegal immigrants facing deportation by ICE. The group operating in 11 cities, including Atlanta, Chicago, and Baltimore, which they deem to be, quote, politically, economically, and ethnically diverse.
All right, a similar topic here, a new sanctuary scandal involving America's churches. The number of illegal immigrants finding refuge in our country's places of worship is growing, and the big question now is, should churches be held accountable? Senior pastor of First Baptist Dallas, Robert Jeffress, joined us earlier today saying that it's not the church's place to interfere on this issue.
God has given government, not the church, the responsibility to enforce the law. Contrary to what some high-profile religious figures say right now, enforcing the laws, enforcing borders is not an unchristian concept.
All right, the pastor says a church is not a legal safe zone for illegal immigrants any more than it is for a murderer. So there you have it. A Fox Business alert now. YouTube finally blocking thousands of videos from a well-known terrorist pushing his propaganda.
Tracy Carrasco from our sister network, Fox Business, is here with video sharing site's latest move. What's that, Tracy?
Good morning, guys. Yes, so YouTube finally taking down these videos of extremist American cleric, his name Anwar al-Awlaki. He was known for influencing terrorists like the Boston Marathon bombers, the Fort Hood gunmen. So YouTube has taken down the videos, 70,000 now down to about 18,000. They've been under pressure to kind of reduce this type of terrorist propaganda. These videos still not completely down, but it is a major step forward for them.
Yeah. And this is interesting. Walmart raising their prices online to help their stores. That seems very counterintuitive.
Yes. You know, their slogan, everyday low prices, but when it comes to their website, they are actually raising prices on a lot of household goods, food items, because it's not really profitable for them to ship these things, and so they're trying to drive traffic to their stores. You know, this is all as they compete with Amazon, of course, so we'll see how this works out for them, this new strategy.
So Bill Gates is now the owner of $80 million worth of land in Arizona?
Yes. His investment firm, Belmont Partners, they've purchased 25,000 acres of land just 50 miles west of Phoenix, and so they're trying to build a smart city. This is a futuristic city that will have, you know, cutting-edge technology and communication, so no word yet on when this will be built, but this could be the wave of what's to come.
Wow.
That is so cool. Yes. All right, I can't wait to see what he does with that.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. It is 5 minutes until the top of the hour. The big scandal in the United Kingdom this morning, Prince Harry breaking military rules. Do you know what he did wrong?
And taking one for the team, the sideline assistant paying a painful price for his internet fame. You got to see this one. Stay tuned.
Good Monday morning. Time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. First up, the good. No tickets here, just turkeys.
Maybe I'll just make your decision for turkey a little bit easier this year and just hand you one if you wouldn't mind.
Is that right? Montana police spreading some Thanksgiving cheer by handing out free turkeys.
That is awesome. Next, the bad. My idol, Prince Harry, caught breaking military rules by sporting a full beard while in uniform at an event in London. Despite no longer being in the armed forces, some military members saying, quote, Prince Harry is letting us all down.
And the ugly, taking one for the team. A Broncos sideline assistant gets nailed in the head when Denver quarterback Brock Osweiler throws the ball, and it goes wild.
Boink.
There we
That's
have it.
Tough. Fox and Friends starts right now. See you later.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies.
I think Mr. Putin is very clever in terms of playing to Mr. Trump.
In all due respect to your previous guests, those were the most ridiculous statements. President Trump is not getting played by anybody.
Will the House pass your tax plan by Thanksgiving?
I believe it will. Our Republicans in the House know that it is time to deliver.
Police say a botched robbery at a Macy's dressing room inside Mall of America turned into a stabbing spree just feet from where kids were visiting with Santa.
The NFL honored Veterans Day with a 2-minute moment of silence before games, but 2 players from the San Francisco 49ers and one on the New York Giants did in fact kneel.
The unexpected levity that happened during the family photo, the crossed hands picture, well, it didn't exactly go how they drew it up.
This month, the 13th day is on a Monday. Thank goodness it's
That's
not
right.
Friday.
I like that song. It like makes me want to. I'm like, yeah. I feel like I've turned into my mom. I'm like the lady at the periphery of the dance floor, going like.
Not actually going out there.
And snapping.
Right.
Right.
Just to show people looking that you could dance, but you choose not to.
Wanting to be out there and wanting to be that good, but maybe I need one more glass of wine.
You know what? Please wait till noon.
Not to worry.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We got a busy show, and we start with the Fox News alert. Overnight, President Trump taking talking trade at the summit in the Philippines.
Yep, the president holding several meetings. It happened overnight for us, not to him, with world leaders while promising a big announcement when he gets home to D.C., he thinks as early as Wednesday.
Kevin Corke is traveling with the president, and he joins us live from Manila in the Philippines. Kevin, good morning.
Hey, good morning. A little bit after 7 o'clock here in beautiful Manila, Philippines. And you're right. It's been very interesting to watch the president, and this is his first major trip to Asia. As you know, the number of bilats, including tonight's breakout with Australia's prime minister, reflected not only of what ASEAN is all about, guys, it's really a reflection of the increasing need for regional collaboration and cooperation. The U.S., of course, a very big part of that. Everything from the welcome here, which was really quite tremendous, as you can well imagine, to what we've seen in terms of the leaders and their cooperation and high-level talks with allies and economic partners all over the region. It's been a chance for the president to focus his attention on securing trade deals and market access for American goods and services. But most of all, everybody wanted to talk about, hey, how'd that bilat go with the leader of the host country, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte? Well, the men did hammer out details on security, the fight against ISIS, and the need for more U.S.-Philippine economic cooperation.
We've had a great relationship. This has been very successful. The ASEAN conference has been handled beautifully by the president and the Philippines and your representatives. We really had a tremendous time, all of the leaders.
Notice how I didn't talk about the idea that they spent a lot of time talking about human rights. Not so much. But as mentioned, this is an important opportunity for the president to lead this trip with billions of dollars in new trade deals to announce. By the way, I should also point out tonight he met with the leader of India, Prime Minister Modi, for another major trade discussion. We expect to hear more about that when the president makes his way back to the White House. Now, that is coming up tomorrow. Of course, in the meantime, more chances to talk about pro-American business. We'll have that for you as we continue to watch it all unfold. Guys, but back to you for now.
Thank you very much. Kevin Corke live in Manila, where it's a little after 7, and the president is having dinner, I believe, with the Prime Minister of Australia right now.
Also, let's bring up how fresh Kevin and John Roberts look, considering how all the time zones are on its head. They're demanded to do early morning here, late night here, and they look as though they could do another 12 days.
I think they're probably sleeping during the day and up at night.
Really?
Maybe. I don't know.
All right, we'll find out.
All right, so when the President of the United States was on Air Force One flying over Vietnam, they had a gaggle in the back of Air Force One, and there was a pool report. There was no recording, however. And during that, he said that he had had 2 or 3 short conversations with Vladimir Putin, largely about Syria. But Russian meddling did come up, and Putin denied it. John Roberts, our own reporter, who Brian is reporting looked fresh, reported that POTUS did not say he believes Putin, just the fact that Putin says he was not involved.
Right. He says Putin believes that he is telling the truth when he says he didn't meddle. That's what President Trump said. And then he looks to move on, because how are they supposed to have relations if they keep on going back to the same thing?
Well, he says the facts are the facts. There's no collusion. There's no evidence of collusion. So we need to move past this because it's hindering our cooperation with Russia on life or death issues. Now, John Brennan, the former CIA director, was on another channel over the weekend on one of the Sunday shows, and he says the president is just afraid of Vladimir Putin. Listen.
I think Mr. Trump is, for whatever reason, either intimidated by Mr. Putin, afraid of what he could do or what might come out as a result of these investigations. So it's very worrisome. It's either naivete, ignorance, or fear in terms of what Mr. Trump is doing vis-a-vis the Russians.
By the way, the reason why those two are booked with Jake Tapper and CNN mainly is because James Clapper and John Brennan were called out by the president via tweet, along with James Comey, as partisan hacks. He says during their intel, they don't like each other. They don't like President Trump when he was candidate Trump. They don't like him as president-elect, and they don't like him as president. So he brings it up. He called them both out. So they went out to defend the intelligence agencies. But the president, I think he's got a couple of things. I think if the president, next time Vladimir Putin says, I didn't hack, he should have 2 or 3 bullet points to show without giving up our methods and practices to say, listen, whether you did it directly or indirectly, Russia, you hacked. And here are the 2 or 3 things that we know of. Now, if you want to move past it, you better not do it again. Well, but for some reason, I think the president thinks that if he acknowledges this, it's acknowledging collusion, which it is not, because he sees that someone's going to take advantage of what he says and use it against him.
Well, there are a lot of analysts on the mainstream who said the president should have called out Putin right to his face, but the president chose not to have diplomacy, in-your-face diplomacy like that. And others have said, look, he got played. Ultimately, what the president said is, hey, why can't we just get along with all the countries, huh? Watch.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies. There weren't 17, as was previously reported. There were actually 4. So I'm not looking to stand and start arguing with somebody when there's reporters all around and cameras recording and seeing our conversation. President Putin really feels, and he feels strongly, that he did not meddle in our election. What he believes is what he believes. What I believe is that we have to get to work. Getting along with other nations is a good thing, not a bad thing, believe me.
I think it's a really good point. He said flat out, I'm with our agencies. Mike Pompeo says they absolutely did it. He's director of the CIA. He's the one who meets with the president every single day. What he's trying to say is, let's move forward. However, when we get closer to the election, I think the president is, when we get closer to 2018, he has got to have a few brushback pitches against the Russians. You cannot try it. Don't even try this again.
Well, Brian, the reason he's specified he was siding with the intel agencies was because some of those analysts on the other channels were going, look, he's believing Putin over his own people at the CIA and the other people who gather stuff and spy on.
Let us know what you think. It's friends@foxnews.com. And other news, it's no secret that the New York Times has not been very friendly to this president or to this administration. We have a perfect example. So the president was traveling, or is traveling, on this Asia tour. Look at this photo. This was published by the New York Times photographer Doug Mills. He tweeted out this photo, and this was the family photo of the president with other world leaders at the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations Summit in Manila. And if you watch the video, look at this picture. It looks like the president's uncomfortable. He's not smiling. But if you watch the video, do you see that face? I watched the video earlier, didn't even notice that. Look, he's smiling there. Hey, how you doing? Talking to the guy, and still smiling. They snapped the photo when he was making that interesting, awkward face.
Well, what's interesting about it is this same photographer who tweeted out that image of the awkward face, President Awkward Face, is Doug Mills, who on Friday posted just a blank frame because he said, this is what our coverage looks like today, no coverage. That was from the APEC forum meetings, and he was steamed about that. And so the Washington Post said Monday, Mills got his revenge with the family photo, trying to make the president look awkward.
Right. In fact, here's what the Washington Post analysis said. The analysis from a story, not an editorial. Trump's awkward grimace reveals the messy reality of high-stakes geopolitics that an airbrushed official portrait of the family would gloss over. Photos like these can help remind us that there are different motivations and different levels of comfort on the world stage and at play behind the scenes.
Well, when you watch the video and you see that photo, it's obvious what they're doing. They're trying to portray him as being awkward, like they just said, and they want him to be remembered in this light.
Here's the thing. I think if there's anything that stands out about the photo, it's that Medvedev can't do it. He's standing like this. You're supposed to cross your arms. If President Trump had gone like this instead of like this, they would have said, oh, he thinks he's above everybody. It's just America first.
You know, ultimately, Brian, after the election, Mr. Medvedev would be more flexible.
Right, absolutely.
So maybe
and bendable and lose his spot to Vladimir Putin. So, by the way, is it President Trump's fault he's 6'3" and no one else is? No. He happens to be taller. He has to go down a little bit further.
It's kind of awkward, right, for men to be like crossing
Right, that's why we don't do it. We don't, for the most part, do that.
So between the feeding of the fish fish, the Japanese car comments, and now the awkward photo like that. That's revenge, according to the Washington Post.
By the way, on this trip, every time he does well, they say, well, they're just playing to his ego. If there's anything awkward, they blow it. Wait a second. No, he's getting along with people. They're getting along with him.
Oh, look.
Let's see if it results in some policy, and we'll find out as early
Or
as
if
Wednesday.
he says there's no evidence of collusion, let's get along with Putin. Oh, he's scared of Putin.
Right.
But
He's being played.
Right.
Anyway, a busy Monday. Right now, though, we got Jillian joining us right now.
Good
The
morning.
headline.
Good Monday morning. It was good. How about you guys?
Good. Good. Thanks for
Excellent. Yeah, no problem. And good morning to you at home as well. Let's begin with this Fox News alert. Some breaking news. At least 330 people are dead after a monster earthquake rocks the Iran-Iraq border overnight. Those numbers rising by the minute after a 7.3 magnitude quake hit just north of Baghdad. Many people running for their lives as buildings swayed. Video from a Kurdish TV news station, just watch, shows a guest shaking in his seat during an interview before rushing off the set. Aftershocks rocking those countries as crews now scramble to rescue thousands who were injured. A stabbing spree at the nation's largest shopping mall, just feet away from where kids were visiting with Santa. Police say a botched robbery at a Macy's dressing room inside Mall of America turned into a stabbing spree when the suspect was confronted by other shoppers. 2 people were stabbed but will be okay. Customers holding the man down until police arrested him. Roy Moore vowing to sue the Washington Post over its report accusing him of sexual misconduct with multiple women, one as young as 14. The GOP Senate candidate in Alabama continues to deny those claims.
These acts are involved with a minor child, completely false and untrue, and for which they will be sued.
Moore also adding he will not drop out or be forced out of the December 12th election for the vacated seat of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And legendary gossip columnist Liz Smith has passed away. Her agent says she died in her New York home of natural causes. Smith's column, titled Liz Smith, was one of the most widely read in the world for more than 25 years. It helped usher in the era of celebrity journalism. Smith was 94 years old. So look at your headlines. I'll send it back.
I got that notice on my phone last night. Just,
She was great.
She
was on this program a couple of times. They referred to her as the First Lady of Dish.
All right, 13 minutes now after the hour.
All right, coming up, a truck comes within inches of hitting a child. We're going to tell you more about that and show you the video.
Yep, we're going to talk about the GOP, the elections, which they have learned from Tuesday. That is a slow zoom in of a great graphic.
Yeah, free advice from a Democrat who says his party did everything wrong in 2016. That's it.
I should have said that. All right, after Republican Ed Gillespie lost to Ralph Northam significantly in Virginia's governor's race, the big question is, why did it happen with this wide a margin? Our next guest says it's an establishment party, a Republican establishment party problem. Here with some advice, a Democrat who says his party did everything wrong in 2016 in many cases, chairman of the Harris poll and former Hillary Clinton campaign strategist, Mark Penn. Mark, what should a Republican take from Governor Gillespie's loss? Not Governor Gillespie, but Ed Gillespie's loss. He's not governor. When I was Karl Rove came out and said, listen, Ed got more votes than the other Republican candidate for when he was running for governor. He just did this, more people came out.
I think when you look at the exit polls, the view here is far from simple. Number one, I think the Republican Party and the establishment itself is 5 points lower than Trump. Right there, that explains a lot of the problems I think that Gillespie got into. And of course, Democrats had a moderate candidate, an Army veteran. And remember, McAuliffe did a pretty good job, had a 54% approval rating.
So health care, they say the reason they voted the way they did, 28% said health care. Number two said, number two was the economy at 26%. Most of the economic indicators are strong, trending in the right direction. So we're back to health care. Is it a Republican failure on health care?
Well, I think the Republican failure on health care was not just in the failure to pass a bill, but I think on the messaging. I think they never really explained why their health care bill would work, what it would do. I think they lost that really badly, and I think Virginia reflects that.
So when you say the establishment Republicans are the problem, you think the establishment Republicans combined with moderate Democrats give Democrats the vote. But the Bernie Sanders Democrats will have many independents running for the hills, won't they?
Well, I think that that's exactly right. I think here the new governor of Virginia defeated the Sanders-Warren candidate, and from my perspective as a moderate Democrat, I think that was great news. Not only did he defeat them in the primary, but he won in the general, and that's where I think the party's got ahead, and that's big trouble for the Republicans if that does happen.
But Mark, as you know, your party, the Democratic Party that you did a lot of work for, is going like this too, right?
Well, they are going like that, but there's a long way between now and the elections. I think a lot of this, the interesting thing to me here was that Trump was at 40, and that means if his rating in Virginia was at 40, he's probably more like 43, 44, nationally, not the kind of 30s that you see in a lot of these polls.
Mark, thanks so much. We'll continue to break this down and find out as we get closer to 2018, but with the president, the way he's tweeting and the news, the way it's coming in, everything could change again. Thanks so much, Mark Penn.
Absolutely, thank you.
Meanwhile, straight ahead, it's one of the most famous football stadiums in the country, but even a classic rivalry could not fill up the stands on Veterans Weekend. Soldier Field, the anthem protest to blame, and many in the media screaming Russia, Russia, Russia after the president asked Putin about meddling in the election. But did they take his comments out of context to advance their agenda? We'll debate it next.
Here's some quick headlines for you. The final witness in the Kate Steinle murder trial expected to take the stand today. Illegal immigrant Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez, who was already deported 5 times, admits to shooting Steinle, but claims that the gun went off accidentally. The 32-year-old was killed in 2015 while walking on the pier in San Francisco with her dad. And an air traffic controller is set to face a judge today for possessing a weapon of mass destruction. Paul George Dandon, who worked at the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, had a pipe bomb at his house. He claims that he got it from his roommate, Derek Fells, who planned to use it on a neighbor after a dispute. Both men are facing federal charges. He is no longer allowed at the Charlotte Airport as an air traffic controller. Steve?
That's a good thing. All right. Thank you very much, Ainsley. Mainstream media screaming Russia, Russia, Russia after the president told reporters while flying to Vietnam that he talked to Vladimir Putin about Russian meddling in our election. Putin denied it. But that's not how the media reported it.
I think he's giving Putin a pass, and I think it demonstrates to Mr. Putin that Donald Trump can be played.
He believes him, while he does not believe the intelligence agencies of the United States of America.
Donald Trump's policy seems to be trust. Hey, listen, Putin said that they didn't do it, so they didn't do it.
So were the president's remarks taken out of context? Some think so. So here we've got a debate right now. We've got staff writer for The Federalist, Bree Payton, along with professor and liberal political commentator Wendy Asefo. Ladies, good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Professor, let's start with you. Some analysts said that it sounded like he was siding with Vladimir Putin over his own intel agencies, although that wasn't quite what the president said. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's really interesting that he mentioned the names of Comey and Clapper, and he said that they were political hacks. And that's not something we want to say, especially when we're dealing with a foreign adversary like Russia. And quite frankly, you know, I don't think that there is a media bias. In the recent study from Harvard, they actually showed that there is not a media bias towards Trump. It's just the way in which the media is portrayed. The media likes things that are fun, that are disorganized, that, you know, are a little off left field. And with the Trump administration, he's had a bunch of missteps. So as they're reporting, they're not reporting this to say he's a bad president. They're just targeting the things in which he's done that is out of the ordinary.
All right. Bree, what do you think? Our own John Roberts reported that the president never said he believes Putin, and yet the mainstream media coverage was, I saw several examples of where they were saying, well, the president believes President Putin over his own intel agencies. That's not at all what he said.
Yeah, it really isn't at all what he said. I mean, in the next breath, he said, I believe our intelligence agencies, they're very fine people that work over there. So, I mean, I think he's making a distinction that Putin's not going to change his answer, and, you know, we're just going to have to move on from there, right? We're going to have to trust our own intelligence community, trust our intelligence agents, and move on and go from there. And I think, you know, if the reason why all of this matters so much is because there is an ongoing investigation into whether or not the Donald Trump campaign and to what extent they they colluded with Russia in order to meddle in the election, right? So it matters. It matters to be accurate and it matters to be precise. And being imprecise and sloppy and acting like Donald Trump and Putin are best friends honestly just plays into the Kremlin's hand. And this is really what Moscow wants, to seem more powerful and more influential and to make Donald Trump seem like he's this dumb buffoon that's just totally playing into the Kremlin's hand, right? I mean, we have to zoom out and look at the long game here. So it's very important to
perhaps,
be correct and precise.
And perhaps, Bree, that's why a number of outlets today are showing that awkward photo of the president going like trying to shake hands like that. When you look at the tape, it wasn't that awkward at all. Professor, what do you think about this?
I honestly think that, Bree makes some good points, but we can't try to dumb this down and say that there was no collusion. We have some evidence that says that something happened. We don't know whether, in fact, we don't, and I was about to, say that. We don't know whether, in fact, the collusion happened between the Trump administration and Russia, but I do believe we have to let the investigation play out. And again, this is not something where he can say in one breath, I believe the evidence from my intel committee, and then the same breath call the members of that committee, political hacks. We're not, the American people are very smart here. We understand the game that is being played. And so if he does believe the evidence that's coming out of his intel committee, then he needs to say that. He doesn't need to then go into the name calling, which he's not only done to members of the intel committee, he's also done to the media. He's called them dumb, he's called them reckless. He said all types of things that are nefarious and is not becoming of the holder of the highest office in the land.
All right, Bree, we'll give you the final word.
Yeah, Wendy, I completely agree with you that we do need to let this investigation play out, and it is very important to get to the bottom of it and determine whether or not the Trump campaign did indeed collude with Russia to meddle in the election. We know that Russia did try to meddle with our election and try to play with our minds, play this propaganda long game, and I think you're right, it is very important. But I also think that those two things can be true and don't conflict with one another, right? I think it's possible to trust the intelligence community's analysis about Russia meddling in the election, and it's also factually true that James Comey is a hack, right? I mean, his behavior has demonstrated that to be true over and over again.
And the president was referring to that report that was compiled by Comey and Clapper and Brennan, and that's why he referred to them as political hacks. All right, ladies, great discussion this morning. Wendy Asafo, Professor, and Bree Payton from the Federalist. All right, good. All right, coming up on this Monday morning, a college party ends in disaster after a floor collapses underneath dozens of students. Look at this. What happened? We've got the frightening moments caught on camera and an explanation coming up.
All right, the first time in the free world, Ainsley Earhart and Brian Kilmeade were able to put together two publishers and go to the Bold City Brewery and have a joint appearance and sign while people had a couple of beers.
You were at a brewery selling books?
It was so
in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, these guys, they protected us.
Right, and this is an earlier signing of Books A Million right in Jacksonville. These two make these hats, custom hats. They are big Trump supporters. They wrote The Forgotten Man, made their own caps out of jeans, and Make America Great Again. And look at this, Steve. At the Books A Million, they had Steve Ducey's poster front and center.
Was that
in Jacksonville?
I remember that.
Orange City Mall.
Orange Park.
Oh, that was from your book tour years ago?
Yeah, when I wrote the Fathering book.
Yeah, special thanks to everybody that came out. Huge Fox fans in Jacksonville, and also a family for the Revolutionary War. So they were caught in time.
We had so much fun. If you were there, thank you so much for supporting us. We love Jacksonville, and it was nice to do it in a brewery because we stood on stage, we talked, we took questions, we talked about the Wounded Warriors, and had some of them on stage.
Yeah, we had the first two rows were all Wounded Warriors, and they came up, and one of them told their story. Yeah. How not only did they serve, go through some rehab, tough times, but he also gave a kidney up for a fellow soldier that needed it.
One guy gave his kidney and is doing great.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I'll be in Kansas City this weekend. AinsleyEarhartBooks.com. If you live in that area, you can find out the details.
I'll give you the barbecue places you got to stop by.
Oh yeah, because it's your area, your neck of the woods.
And I'll be in Philadelphia Wednesday night. You go to BrianKilmeade.com. Yeah, Montgomery Community College, and then over the weekend Oklahoma, then St. Louis.
All right.
I grew up near there. I'll tell everyone to go check you out.
You got to share your barbecue joints with
Absolutely. Good morning to you guys, to you at home as well. Let's begin with this story. The Pentagon now identifying the American soldier who died in Iraq. Chief Warrant Officer Lee Smith killed during a non-combat related incident. The 35-year-old assigned to fight ISIS in the 101st Airborne Division and Combat Aviation Brigade. Lee was from Arlington, Texas, and his death is under investigation. A college party literally bringing down the house when dozens of students plunge through the floor. Up to 7 people had minor injuries at the University of North Texas students' third-floor apartment when this happened. 48 people were forced to leave their apartments. Firefighters say too many people jumping at one time caused that collapse. Scary. Tragedy avoided by just inches when a truck nearly hits a child getting off a bus. Oh my gosh, this happening in Norway where the boy wasn't looking before crossing the street. Fortunately, he was able to outrun the truck as the driver slammed on the brakes. Wow. A double amputee Marine veteran completing his 31st marathon in 31 days. Rob Jones making his final strides on Veterans Day in Washington, D.C. He joined us on the show last month telling us why he decided to start his remarkable journey after losing both of his legs during an explosion in Afghanistan.
I just figured, no, this is the situation now, so I'm gonna, my mission is still the same, make a difference in the world, leave the world better than I found it. So how am I gonna do that now?
Jones ran more than 9,000 miles, raising about $125,000 for veterans charities. Isn't that incredible? What an inspiration.
That is unbelievable. Thank you very much, Jillian. All right, she just mentioned it was Veterans Day weekend. We have been telling you about how there was a Facebook group that started a boycott the NFL this weekend. Lawrence Jones from The Blaze joins us right now.
Thanks for having me.
And Lawrence, when you look at the stands, for instance, Soldier Field, a legendary rivalry between the Bears and the Packers, there were a lot of empty seats there. You would have expected everyone to be filled up.
Yeah, that's how the free market works. The players have a right, since the owners have decided that they weren't going to ban the players for kneeling. But in return, the shareholders, the consumers have a right not to go to the games. That's what's happening across the country for those teams that decide to kneel. Look, I've been very vocal on this movement. I think there's a lot of virtual signaling on both sides. But my biggest problem is that if you really want to help your movement, why would you do it on that day? Of all days, you should have stood for the veterans, and that's why it was only like 3 to 5 players doing it, because enough of them had enough sense to know this wasn't the right day to do it.
When you were watching that and you saw that there were 3 players that took a knee, but the majority of all of those that have taken a knee, they decided to stand yesterday because it was Veterans Day weekend, including Rashard Matthews, who hasn't stood since the president criticized them.
Well, you know, it was interesting because I had to see it through the playbacks because I'm a Cowboys fan, and none of our players, since we're America's team, we don't kneel. You know, there is a lot of people within this movement that have legitimate concerns that I think we should talk about, but the question is it the time or the place? Look, I want to see, if they really want change to happen, I think the president should invite the players to the White House and talk about criminal justice reform. If the players deny that chance, then you know where their heart is. If you really want to get change moving, then you got to sit at the table with people that you necessarily won't agree with politically to get change.
Well, a couple of things. Colin Kaepernick's been invited a couple of times, and now he's been invited again to the owners' meeting. He just doesn't show up. He doesn't talk. He just says, I just want a job. But meantime, he's suing the owners on saying it's collusion, and he's actually subpoenaing their emails to prove it.
He's going to lose, but he can go forward all he wants. Look, I always talk about the Colin Kaepernick situation. When he was the NFL Super Bowl contestant, he was not kneeling then. It just seems very mighty suspicious to me that on the downside of his career, he decided to kneel. I think that there's a combination of the kneeling as well as his performance. That's why he doesn't have a job right now.
All right, Lawrence, let's change topics. In the New York Times, they ran an op-ed from a Yeshiva University law professor, and the topic was, can my children be friends with white people? And here's a passage from it. Donald Trump's election has made it clear that I will teach my boys the lessons generations old, one that I, for the most part, nearly escaped. I will teach them to be cautious. I will teach them suspicion. And I will teach them distrust. much sooner than I thought I would. I will have to discuss with my boys whether they can truly be friends with white people.
When I was reading that, I didn't even believe it. But I had to check it multiple times because he is literally teaching his child to be racist, be prejudiced, to judge people by their skin color, not the content of their character. And it just goes to show you that this is a professor. This is what's being taught to your children. This is the money that you're giving to fund literally prejudice. They're teaching it all across the country. Parents should beware.
How did this make the cut to be a New York Times op-ed?
Because this is their agenda. I mean, this is the new liberal, the new Democratic Party. This is where progressives are going. And I caution parents, be careful where you're sending your kids to school. The money that you're funding this, you're essentially funding this movement. So I think parents need to be careful. This is nothing new. I just think the nation needs to turn back to God. I think we've lost our moral compass in America, and I think we need a lot of prayer because our kids are going to be experiences on a daily basis.
All right, Lawrence, thank you so much for being with us.
Appreciate you.
Great to see you.
Coming up, one church sending a message to its parishioners, we are not a gun-free zone. The pastor is going to join us live next hour.
Yes, plus the House and Senate will take up their tax reform bills this week. What does that mean? What does each version mean for your family? Liz Clayman had broke it down for us, and she promises to turn around, face us, and talk to us.
This week, both the House and the Senate will work on their separate tax plans.
Good. Soon they'll talk to each other. While the bills have some similarities, they also have some differences. What does it mean for the average American family? And we assume you're American.
Well, Liz Clayman is here right now with Insight. She's the host of Countdown to the Closing Bell on our sister network, Fox Business. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right. So ultimately, the president said what he wanted was he wanted the tax plan that comes out of Congress to be simpler, to be able to do it on a piece of paper, and for it to be provide relief to the middle class. Do both plans do that?
Well, H&R Block accountants should not be worried they'll be losing their jobs because people are so confused. There is a little bit of complex dealings within each one.
Okay.
But you have to look at both of these and say, are they a total mess? No. They're each flawed depending on which state you live in. But you have to look and see that the House definitely simplifies things way more. And it gives a little wiggle room on things like the elimination of the deduction for the high tax states like New York, New Jersey, California. And there are middle class people who do use that deduction. So if it goes away, they will perceive it as a tax hike. But it's not when you're looking at the exact wording of it.
Well, someone should tell Republicans, because those people like Darrell Issa and Peter King, Republicans in high-tax states, are saying, I'm out.
Well, they're representing their constituents. That's the thing, Brian. And we are these 50 states. Everybody's completely diverse in their wants and needs and complaints. So if we can get something where everybody feels just a little bit of pain, that will be fine, but they don't. For example, neither plan gets rid of this very sort of quiet side window issue called the carried interest trade for billionaires who are in private equity. They pay at a 20% rate.
Why?
How is that fair? Why? Because the way they calculate their income, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but for your viewers who don't understand this, the way they calculate their income, it is not earned income like the rest of us. So you can have a very wealthy CEO who's paying 39%, but these guys are only paying 20%, and it's untouched. The president said he wants to get rid of it. Neither one does.
All right, well, something we are so proud of you for, you're very involved in this organization, Building Homes for Heroes. Bob Massey was on last week because he was at the event when you got the award. Liz is an amazing person, and she knows each of these heroes that have come back from fighting for our country. They're badly, badly injured, and she helps raise money to build mortgage-free homes for these individuals. Tell us about this night and what we're seeing, Liz.
Oh, you know, I have to tell you, we were able to honor our heroes. These guys, they are the worst wounded. They have multiple amputations. They have burns. They have brain damage. It's horrible, but what we do is we build mortgage-free, totally customized homes for their specific injuries. So if you're blind, we'll give you a Braille kitchen and the flooring in each room. For example, for Hugo Gonzalez, who got traumatic brain injury and he became blind, we gave him this flooring in each room. It's different, so when his white cane touches it, he knows he's in his second daughter's bedroom or the kitchen.
Liz, what was it like to be honored by this organization?
I didn't want to be. I said, let me just remain in the background so that I can help raise. But they calculated it. They told me that over 7 years, since I first heard about them, that I was responsible for about $30 million in
Unbelievable. Now, for the folks watching right now, if they would like to help out, what's the website?
Buildinghomesforheroes.org. And I can tell you guys right now, I'll take the change in your sofa cushions. We've had veterans 70 years old on a fixed income sent in $5, people sending in $2,000. So we'll take anything.
You're a hero too, Liz. Thank you.
Liz. Back in a moment.
Months now, the U.S. Air Force has been saying that they are facing a pilot shortage, and it appears to be getting even worse.
So what can be done to fix this? We have signed up our own Rob Schmidt to see whether or not you would qualify to be
I
a
can't
pilot.
fix it, I can tell you that much. But what they let me do is just incredible. One way to get more pilots in the air for the Air Force and for the Navy, train them faster and more effectively. And one company competing for a big Air Force contract to replace its aging training jets, which are very old, by the way. That company is Lockheed Martin. I went to see their operation in Greenville, South Carolina. Woo! Check this out.
I feel the need for speed.
Do I look like Maverick or Goose?
I may look like I'm ready to fly, but it takes a lot to make it as a fighter pilot in the U.S. military. And Lockheed Martin is aiming to make the process a little easier. They're one of 3 major companies looking to win a contract with the U.S. Air Force to build a new training jet. But it's not just a plane Lockheed is offering the Air Force, it's an entire training system.
We're trying to develop the next generation of pilot training for the U.S. Air Force.
This is where the students would begin the process.
Exactly.
This is where they start trying to get into that jet.
Exactly. One of the keys to that is virtual reality. The student can see inside the cockpit, can manipulate controls of the cockpit, all within a classroom.
The whole idea here is teaching student pilots in a faster way, in a better way, and in a cheaper way by using programs like this. But this is just a simulation. Now it's time to really get in the jet. Helping me out is Lockheed Martin experimental test pilot Elliot Hemo Clemens. He's a former F-18 Navy pilot who also has hundreds of hours flying the new F-35.
This is a T-50. It's a well-vetted, high-performing jet trainer. As technology matures, we take advantage of that, and it's going to train Air Force pilots a lot more efficiently than has been done in the past. And we have a good solution with that. It's ready now. It's low risk. The aircraft's been produced, it's been tested, it's been vetted, it's been flown. So we did have this airplane modified a little bit.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
Recognize that name? Are you ready to go flying?
I'm absolutely 100% ready to go flying.
Let's get out there then.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so now we're just going to pull some G's.
Okay.
Okay, that's 4 G's.
Whew. That was intense.
Okay, now Rob, if you look at your display, you can see the red triangles. Those are, I just started up the scenario.
Okay, sure.
So those are computer-generated bad guys.
Okay, yep.
It's all fake. Once they get in range, I'll shoot simulated missiles at them.
What would you guys have done before you could do this kind of simulation? Would you have had to just play like games with each other, or how does it work?
To get that training, we need actual aircraft in the air flying against us. With this system, we don't. What we could do now is let you have a chance to fly the airplane.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay. You can take the stick and you can roll it as much as you want.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Here we go. I'm rolling it.
41.35.
Woo!
Well, you know, the rule is if you roll left, you have to unwind by rolling right. Is
that right?
Yeah.
Okay, rolling right. Here we go.
All right, here we go.
Woo! Oh my God.
Actually doing pretty good. I've never flying before.
I think that is just the craziest thing.
Congratulations.
Did it feel good to be back on solid ground?
Yeah, and you said it. I mean, you said that would scare me to death, and that's what it did.
Driving
It's
600 miles
when
an
I was
hour.
in it, it was fine, and as soon as they let me control it, I was like, I'm gonna die. You know, it's just that's the first thing that went through my
How was
head.
your stomach? Did you get sick?
It was so close, but I held it together. I had the bag in hand as we were landing, and I'm looking at the bag, and I'm like, come on, man, just don't lose it.
Thousands of 18 to 22-year-olds just signed up to be pilots.
Yeah,
Thanks to your,
exactly.
good job.
It's awesome.
Good job,
That was
Maverick.
fantastic. All right, thank you.
Thanks to everyone at Lockheed Martin, too. Meanwhile, still ahead on this show, Mike Huckabee. According to our rundown, Ivanka Trump, and not to brag, but Louis Gohmert also here.